feel rather guilty because I think people were having a set of extremely good conversations and enjoying themselves. And now you've been dragged back in here with an antique bell that Özlem doesn't know where it came from, but it serves the purpose very well. And it says down here, I have to say, minister, ambassadors, and I think to professors, I can say doctors, but it says ladies and gentlemen, but I'm not sure there are any of those left, are there? By the time I finish. There's probably a few normal people in here, but anyhow, ladies and gentlemen as well. It's lovely, lovely to be here, and I can assure you you're not going to get a speech or a lecture from me. I am here to introduce the main act, and I will keep it that way, and I cannot, I assure you, match the erudition of my Turkish colleague. I listened to the Ambassador Cengiz there, and thinking, my God, as a colleague, he knows an awful lot about the subject. And,
don't worry, nothing else.
I'm glad I don't have to negotiate with him over things that went on 100 years ago. I would lose, definitely. Anyhow, it's very nice to be here, and it's a fantastic thing to support. We're really proud to be here and to be supporting it. And thank you very much for inviting me to come along, and congratulations particularly to Uşak, who, under the leadership of Özlem Sanberk, are a fantastic partner for us and a real jewel in the crown of independent thought in Turkey. So it's a pleasure to be with you. And the British Institute, which of course is last year we had, again, Ambassador played a really key role in putting this on, and it was a tremendous success. We had the centenary anniversary of the Gallipoli landings, and you know, it's something to watch British and Turkish leaders, and of course leaders from around the world, most particularly Australia and New Zealand, for whom Gallipoli has a particular resonance. They're accompanied by, of course, members of our armed forces and by some relatives of some of the veterans, some of them only one generation away. Their fathers had served at Gallipoli, some grandparents. And I had the great privilege of acting back in 1990 on my first posting to Turkey as an escort officer to the Royal British Legion. And we brought out, if I remember rightly, 5 British veterans, plus a Canadian was in that party, and of course there were many times that many Kiwis and Aussies, and of course many Turkish Ghazis. And I think the youngest, if I remember, was 93, the oldest was 108, I think, 109. And of course it was the last time at which the veterans were able to come out and join in that commemoration, the 75th, very special. And you know, I think it gave me a very striking sense of how a desperately fought campaign of great violence, great concentrated violence over many months could be transformed over the intervening years into a really strong bond of friendship between the Allies on one side, the Entente powers, the UK and France, of course, at the heart of that, but the UK then, the British Empire, and as I mentioned earlier on, you know, for Australia and New Zealand, and of course for Turkey, something which many people in the UK I don't think fully understand. They know about the Anzacs, and they know about the role of Gallipoli as a founding myth, if you like, of those two countries, the sense of where their sense of nationhood emerged from. Many fewer people in the UK understand just how central the legend of Çanakkale plays in, if you like, the founding myths that surround the birth of the Republic of Turkey. So it was a very privileged, I feel doubly privileged to have been there as a young man back in 1990, and then to come back by some fluke as ambassador in 2015 was very special. So I think this is a very short opportunity to reflect a bit on the relationship and the huge change in relationship between our two countries. And I am a firm believer, although I can't match Ambassador Cengiz's erudition, I am a firm believer that you can't understand the present if you don't understand the past. But I am rather acutely aware that I'm talking to an audience of eminent historians, and I'm not going to venture my own theories of history in this company. I am a PPE graduate from Professor Rogan's University, a subject choice which I can tell you any Oxford historian will tell you gives you the pretensions of a polymath, but no real intellectual depth. Perfect training for diplomacy. So instead, I thought I would focus my remarks on the way the past affects present relations between Turkey and the UK, and how, if you like, the UK sees the tomorrow of that relationship. Because the fact is, and I from time to time become acutely aware of this, the period that you're discussing today and over the next day or so, it may be 100 years in the past, but it still very much shapes the way that the UK is seen in Turkey. So words or phrases like Lawrence of Arabia, Sykes-Picot, the Treaty of Sèvres, 6-year British occupation of Istanbul, those 2 warships mentioned earlier, paid for but never delivered, those are still reference points today. And even for young people in Turkey, this is not something that dies with the generations. It is kept alive, and it's assertively kept alive. It's part of the educational curriculum in Turkey, and each generation is retaught about the perfidy of the Brits in the early 20th century. So, those of you, some of you I know follow my Twitter feed, UKAmbRichard, at UKAmbRichard, for those of you who'd like to start. You can see this demonstrated on a regular basis. If I say something that people don't like in Turkey, I suddenly become the Sinsi Adam, Sinsi English, sneaky, I become a Lawrence. All of these things come pouring out. And of course at one level it's comic, and I try not to engage too much in banter around it, but it's very strong, and I do feel sometimes that I'm like the kind of ambassador for the British Empire, and that I'm not actually the ambassador for the UK in 2016. So what you're talking about still resonates, and you can't, of course, you have to understand historical facts and historical memory. We shouldn't deny difficult aspects of our past, including British colonialism and the darker sides of that. But we should also understand, surely, that as you are considering today, it does not have to rigidly define our present or our future. My grandfather, my mother's father, fought against the British as a member of the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and earned a medal from Eamon de Valera for his services against the British. And I'm very proud of that. My grandfather, I'm very proud of the work he did to secure Irish independence. But his grandson stands before you as a British ambassador. So enemies can indeed become allies. So as a result of those processes and events you're discussing, the UK and Turkey today are major strategic partners, as the ambassador was pointing out. And we each have an interest in the other's success. We're NATO allies, we're fellow members of the G20, and we work closely together in many other international organisations. The UK is Turkey's strongest backer in the EU, and we're deepening our bilateral cooperation all the time. I now lead, people may be interested in this, I now lead the UK's largest diplomatic team in Europe. So I have more people work for me than work for my equivalents in Brussels, Paris or Berlin. And that reflects the importance of what we're doing. We find ourselves in a time of multiple crises. Cooperation on counter-terrorism, on people trafficking, and on regional security is absolutely vital to both of our interests. And that requires people here building relationships with Turkish colleagues. But it's also a relationship that goes beyond these current crises. It's going to always be hugely important. I came here first in 1990. Turkey was incredibly important to me. I know that David was ambassador here at the turn of the century, having served here in 65, and this country has always attracted a great deal of interest from London, and we've always needed to make sure that we looked after the relationship. But if you look also at the differences, I was in Gaziantep again during this week, and Gaziantep and Kayseri are the two cities I often quote as examples of the differences that I've seen economically in Turkey over the 25 years I've been working on the subject of Turkey, and those are it. I mean, Gaziantep was a dusty southeastern town in 1990, and you look at it now, even with the stresses and strains that it's under and bearing so extraordinarily generously over the Syrian refugee crisis, it's an amazing place. It has modern modernity, fantastic hotels, fantastic shopping, wonderful restaurants, and I think one of the finest museums in the world. The Zugma Mosaic Museum is wonderful. So, Turkey's got a rapidly developing economy, it's got an enviable rate of economic growth and the capacity to do even better if structural reforms are implemented as promised. And it has more young people by some distance than any other country in the EU. So all of these things point to even greater significance in the future. So that's how we see UK-Turkey relationship today and in the future, but I've strayed from what I'm supposed to be talking about, which is history. And so I'm going to get us back on track. I'd like to introduce Professor Eugene Rogin, Professor of Modern Middle East History at Oxford and Director of St Antony's College, Middle East Centre. Professor Rogin is, as we all know, one of the preeminent scholars of modern Middle Eastern history in the UK and has published authoritative works on late Ottoman history and the history of the Arab peoples. And I have to say, I've got several of my team here. I'm rather hoping that they have all read Eugene's book. He's perfectly, if you'd like to test them a little later, I can produce them for you. But I think, I read The Fall of the Ottomans, the Great War in the Middle East, 1914 to 1920, about a year or so back, and I thought it was fantastic. I don't think I've ever seen anything which pulls together the Ottoman point of view, the Turkish point of view, so clearly, and it makes it so real in the eyewitness accounts that you were able to give of the Turkish campaigns in the east of what is now Turkey, or down in Kut and indeed in Gallipoli. So it's a fantastic book, and if you haven't read it, I'm sure pretty much everybody in this room has, but if you haven't, then you must, I think, to understand this period of history. But there I go, this is the PPEist pontificating on history. So I'm going to stop, and it's with great pleasure that I hand the floor to Professor Rogin to present his keynote lecture, Soldiers on the Ottoman Front, the view from both sides of the